hello and good morning. Thanks for being with us. Justice has been delivered. The message from the US President Joe Biden, as he said that the leader of the terrorist group, Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's right-hand man, has been killed in a drone strike in Afghanistan. Addressing the nation from the White House, Mr. Biden set out how he authorised the action which killed the man who was one of the masterminds of the 9/11 terror attacks. Zawahiri was standing on the balcony of a safe house in downtown Kabul when he was killed by 2 Hellfire missiles. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
He was, quite literally, Osama bin Laden's right-hand man, the doctor turned terrorist who became leader of Al-Qaeda when bin Laden was killed by US Navy SEALs in 2011. His death now is the most significant counter-terror operation for the Americans since then.
My fellow Americans, on Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan that killed the emir of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri.
He'd been a wanted man since the late 1990s, a $25 million bounty on his head. In the end, remarkably, he was tracked down to a safe house linked to the Taliban in the Afghan capital, Kabul. US officials say intelligence located his wife and children to a building in the city. For months, they monitored it and spotted Zawahiri. We're told the president was briefed last month and informed that the Al-Qaeda leader had been seen repeatedly in the house. He never left the building, but was often out on the balcony. Last week, the president gave the green light for a strike. And shortly after 6 a.m. Kabul time on Sunday, 2 Hellfire missiles were fired from a drone.
He played a key role in the bombing of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 224 and wounding over 4,500 others. He carved a trail of murder and violence against American citizens.
And then there was 9/11, planned and carried out with such devastation on the orders of bin Laden and Zawahiri. He was an Egyptian, jailed in Cairo with other Islamists in the 1980s.
We want to speak to the whole world.
He became the brains of Al-Qaeda, the guiding figure behind the public face that was bin Laden. The Americans are claiming a great victory with his killing. President Biden proving, he says, that America doesn't need to be in Afghanistan to kill terrorists there.
No matter where you hide, if you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out.
In the UK, reaction from the MI6 chief. Tough job professionally done by our allies. Culmination of a long shared effort since 9/11 to eliminate the threat posed by Zawahiri, a man responsible with his toxic creed for the death of so many these past 3 decades. Thoughts with their families tonight. But here's the troubling reality for the Americans. They have left Afghanistan to Taliban leaders still happy and able to harbour Al-Qaeda's leaders. That's hardly reassuring. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
All right, let's bring in our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who's joining us now live. Deborah, good morning to you. So what does this tell us about the Taliban and their promises? And can we expect there to be reprisals from this action?
Western officials will, of course, be anticipating that the core Al-Qaeda group will be trying to avenge the killing of their leader. But Zawahiri didn't inspire the same kind of charismatic following as Osama bin Laden, the founder of Al-Qaeda, and the group's ability to launch those spectacular terrorist attacks that became synonymous with their brand at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the noughties has been significantly degraded by the last 20 plus years of counterterrorism work in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, around the world by US special forces and spies and British counterparts and others. Yet there is going to be a lot of worrying questions about the fact that the Taliban, which has such a deep relationship with Al-Qaeda, despite its promises to the US to sever those ties, was not just harbouring leaders in Afghanistan, but allowing the leader of Al-Qaeda to reside in Kabul, clearly uncomfortable for the Taliban. Now we're going to see announcements probably of who will be the replacement to Zawahiri. And one thing is clear, the threat from terrorism, while degraded, has not gone away.
OK, Deborah Haynes, thank you very much for that. Now, the national flag carrier British Airways has suspended the sale of short-haul flights from Heathrow until at least next Monday, after the airport put a cap on the number of passengers who could pass through each day. Now, it comes as staff shortages have led to long queues and cancellations. Our reporter Ashna Hurnag is here with us now for more on this. Ashna, good morning to you. So, how concerned should people be who are travelling through Heathrow in the next couple of days?
This is likely going to affect passengers who are travelling domestically, but also throughout Europe. So if you're planning to book a flight to either of those destinations or any of those destinations in the next week, you won't be able to. This, they say, is to comply with Heathrow Airport's cap on passenger numbers. Last month, the airport said that every single day, the maximum amount of passengers that would be able to travel would be 100,000. And BA, in response, said, OK, we're going to cancel 10,300 flights up until October, between now and October, to try and limit the number of people who are passing through the airport. Some airlines decided to reject that request from Heathrow, such as Emirates being one of them. But with BA cancelling those flights and not letting new passengers who are wanting to book onto short-haul flights go ahead, then that is a significant problem for passengers who are already facing quite a severe amount of disruption. We're seeing people struggling to get hold of their bags. There have been a breakdown in baggage systems. We know that airport security, we've seen long queues there as well. And that's on top of thousands of flights being cancelled every single day. The industry, we know, has struggled to cope with demand. There have been significant staff shortage issues and a surge in post-pandemic travel. But Heathrow's limit and cap on the number of passengers who are travelling, that 100,000 mark, is due to be in place up until September the 11th. So I guess the disruption will continue for a few months yet, and that will do little to quell the nerves of people who are due to go on holiday.
Absolutely right, Kate. Ashna, thank you very much for that. Well, these are the latest pictures that we have from Heathrow. Of course, people will be travelling. They're very concerned about how long it's going to take them to get away on holiday, whether they'll even be able to take their flights short haul using BA right now. We'll have, of course, more on that throughout the morning. But in the last couple of minutes, we have had the latest results come in from BP. Their figures have been announced. As you can see, there has been an £8.5 billion profit in the second quarter of this year. The underlying profits have been the highest they have been in 14 years. Of course, this comes at a time when the country is going through a cost of living crisis. People are struggling to be able to pay for fuel for their cars, but British Petroleum has announced huge profits for the second quarter of this year, £8.45 billion. We'll have full analysis on that with Helen Ann Smith in just a few minutes' time. Now, the former Tory leadership contender, Penny Mordaunt, has endorsed the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss in the race to become Prime Minister. This is a huge blow to Rishi Sunak. Now, she gave her backing to Ms Truss as she introduced her at the latest Conservative Party hustings, calling Ms Truss the hope candidate who knows what she believes in. Now, during the event in Exeter, the two candidates once again clashed over tax cuts and the economy. Now, where does all of this leave us in the race to succeed Boris Johnson at number 10? Joining me for our daily polling pit stop is the head of polling research and opinion research, Chris Curtis. Hi, Chris, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us. So, look, let's have a look at some of the polls that have come out in the last couple of days or so from Opinion. Let's bring this one up. This one compares directly Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to Margaret Thatcher, of all things. Tell us what numbers we're pulling out of this. I mean, there's the first statistic there that people who've been spoken to about this think that Rishi Sunak is quite different.
Yeah, there's a reason we do this, which is that people still don't necessarily know quite a lot about what the different leadership contenders stand for. They don't necessarily have a strong view on their politics or their political positioning. And in situations like that, quite often what voters do is they think about what's come before and which leader they're similar or different to, and then they start to associate them with that leader, and that forms quite a lot of the views that they form about them. And in this case, in Britain at the moment, it is still true that Margaret Thatcher is one of our most popular prime ministers in recent memory. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons Rishi Sunak's isn't being associated with Margaret Thatcher so much. Liz Truss is being associated.
Let's bring up the numbers of Liz Truss. And this is not just to do with the fact that she was pictured sitting on top of a tank, like Margaret Thatcher famously was.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some of this is going to be down to lazy comparisons to do with the fact that, you know, Liz Truss is a woman and Liz Truss is a Conservative. But what we do know is that people do quite like Margaret Thatcher, and therefore that association is probably working for Liz Truss and working less well for Rishi Sunak.
Yeah. Let's take a look at how they're being viewed as potential leaders, and this is from the same, from your opinion polling as well. All three leaders have fairly similar ratings when it will come to who will be the best Prime Minister.
Yes, so without say, if you sort of, the two people who are likely to be next Prime Minister and the one person they'll be facing in the run-up to the next general election, all three of them now have pretty similar ratings. Right. So here's Liz Truss's: 33% think should be good, 37% think should be bad.
Sunak, if we can.
So that's a net score there of about -4. If you look at Rishi Sunak, 41% good, 44% bad, a net score of -3. Yep. Slightly more people are aware of him, know about him.
Right. And Keir Starmer?
And then when you look at Keir Starmer as well, again, slightly higher, slightly higher levels of awareness, 38% good, 42% bad, a net score of -4. All three similar leaders have fairly similar ratings at this moment in time.
What does that tell us about the way that people are viewing the person who's going to be next Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, none of these are particularly good ratings, but what we're about to see is one of these people, probably Liz Truss, let's be honest, about to become Prime Minister. Most of the time when somebody becomes Prime Minister, they get a honeymoon period. They have an opportunity to have a bit of a political reset, to set out a new vision to the country. That's what Liz Truss is going to be trying to do when she becomes leader in September. How successful that is, I think, will dictate the next election, because she has really big problems that she's going to have to overcome in this country, really big headwinds that are going to impact the next election, whether that's the NHS or the cost of living crisis. How's she going to handle that? How's she going to cope with that? Is she going to use that honeymoon period to put her in a good place for the next general election? Possibly, but if not, I think, you know, with these kind of approval ratings and after 14 years in government, it's fair to say that Labour would stand a good chance at that.
And it also might say that people are cynical about all politicians potentially who are going to be Prime Minister. What about this one? This is from Redfield and Wilton. This is talking about their sort of the head-to-head of who'd be the better Prime Minister.
Yeah, so, I mean, what you've seen, not just the top-line numbers there, but the changes underneath as well, is pretty similar to what we've been seeing across quite a lot of polling over the last couple of months, which is Liz Truss's ratings going up. I mean, you know, you've got this where she's, you know, now ahead of Keir Starmer on the best Prime Minister, but you've also got questions about whether, we were just looking at whether she'd make a good or bad Prime Minister. She's seeing quite a substantial increase on that question.
What do you put that down to? Is that because she's getting all these cabinet backers now, do you think?
I think so, but what we're basically seeing is a lot of Conservative voters swinging in behind her. So previously her ratings among those who voted Conservative in 2019 weren't that great. She's seen quite a substantial increase in that, and that's why she's now looking in a much sort of better position.
And let's just take a quick look at versus Rishi Sunak in the same polling, if we can. I understand that we haven't actually got that graphic, so let's not do that in all because it's not there. But let's look at Keir Starmer, because obviously whoever wins this race will be facing Keir Starmer most likely if he stays in post at the next election. And this is not great reading for the Labour leader about how people think that what he actually believes in and how people actually believe.
Yeah, I mean, look, Keir Starmer's a few years into the job now, and I think it's fair to say that, you know, lots of people still don't necessarily have a clear view of what it is he stands for. He's still got time left to do that. He's still got time to set out a vision for the country, but he's going to need to, because, you know, if people don't necessarily know what you stand for, they start making associations themselves, and those associations are not necessarily things that Keir Starmer would like. You know, it's one of the reasons that you end up getting in these difficult situations over strikes like he has in the past few days, because people don't know what he stands for. So it's very hard for you know, to not end up in a bit of a mess when questions like this come up. So Keir Starmer needs to start to set out that vision. He needs to think about how he's going to take Liz Truss on the next election. Ultimately, that vision is going to have to be based around the economy and a response to the cost of living crisis, because they are the most important issues to voters. You know, you ask voters at the moment, what's the biggest issue facing the country or your personal life? They'll say the cost of living crisis, and why are you asking me about anything else? So Labour needs a response for how it's going to do better than the Conservatives on that key issue.
I think we see the comparative as well as to what people think about Liz Truss and what she stands for right now, if we can bring that up. There we go. What do we make of these numbers?
Yeah, so, Liz Truss hasn't been, so dominant in politics necessarily over the past few years. She hasn't been asking 6 questions a week to the Prime Minister on the dispatch box or popping up on the news most evenings like Keir Starmer has. So the fact that, a lot more people, almost as many people know what she stands for, I think is quite telling, and it does show the task that Keir Starmer still has in front of him in setting out the kind of person he is and the kind of Prime Minister he would be and setting out that vision to the country.
Yeah, defining who he is rather than letting the Conservative Party define who he is. Right, Chris Curtis, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for that. All right, let me just remind you now, if you need reminding, that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will both take part in a live special programme, The Battle for Number 10, here on Sky News. It's going to be hosted by Kay Burley. It'll be on Thursday at 8 p.m. All right, let's bring in our political correspondent, Amanda Akas, who's joining us now with the latest. So, Amanda, good morning to you. We had some more hustings last night, didn't we?
Absolutely, and there was a very dramatic moment when Penny Mordaunt, who was the Brexiteer, former Defence Secretary, wildly popular with the party membership, narrowly pipped at the post to become one of those 2 candidates in the final run to be party leader, pipped at the post by Liz Truss after a last-minute surge in support from MPs. She was the candidate whose endorsement both of them wanted to hear. And last night, in a major piece of dramatic political theatre, she came out in support for Liz Truss, who she described as the candidate of hope, someone who knows what she believes in, saying she would clobber her opponents. Very warm words, despite perhaps some bad blood between her and Liz Truss's camps during the earlier stages of the campaign. Now, she's the 4th of the defeated candidates to come out in support of Liz Truss, following a whole roll call of other big names, cabinet big hitters over the past few days, and also this morning writing in The Telegraph, Andy Street, the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands. Cynics might argue some of them have been waiting to see which way the wind has been blowing, perhaps hoping for a job in a future Liz Truss government. But certainly the timing is key. Ballot papers being sent out this week, of course. Now, Liz Truss has a big announcement today. She's pledging a war on Whitehall waste, saying she'll save £11 billion from cuts to the civil service, some of it quite controversial, including perhaps most controversially, cuts to regional pay, £8.8 billion she's pledging across the public sector. But it remains to be seen what impact that will have on the
We'll put some of that to a backer of Liz Truss. Jacob Rees-Mogg will be on the programme very later. Amanda, thank you so much for that. Now, still to come, as MPs call for a body image warning on retouched photos to be put into law, I'll be joined by the chair of the Health and Social Care Committee, Jeremy Hunt. The Minister for Brexit Opportunities and the Liz Truss supporter, as I said, Jacob Rees-Mogg, will be with me later in the hour. And the Labour Party's Shadow Climate Change Minister, Kerry McCarthy, will also be on the programme shortly after 8 a.m. All right, let me bring you a little bit more on the breaking news that just came in the last half an hour or so. The energy giant BP has announced its half-yearly results. They have revealed that they have made a profit in the second quarter of $8.5 billion. Let's bring in our business correspondent, Helen Ann Smith, who is joining us from the newsroom. Good morning to you, Helen Ann. So, huge profits coming in from BP.
Yeah, another reminder, if we needed it, of just how well some of those big oil and gas companies are doing at the moment. BP, in the second quarter of this year, profits of £8.5 billion. Just note that's up from the pretty big profits it made in the first quarter of £6.25 billion. Worth saying as well, BP not alone in this. We had Shell's results last week. That company also doing extremely well. These profits this morning are about 3 times as much as the company made in the same quarter last year. So why? Well, there's a few key reasons, namely the massive surge in the wholesale price in oil and gas that we've seen. That's partly because of the pandemic disruption, this huge surge in demand that we're seeing post-pandemic, and of course, the war in Ukraine as well. And you might ask why this matters so much. Why do we care that private companies are doing well? That's what they set out to do, of course. And it's because of the cost of living crisis. While these big profits being made, many people struggling to pay their bills. And that was put into starker focus this morning. Some new figures from analysts about how much the energy price cap is due to go up in October. They've said it could go up to as much as over £3,600 a year for the average family. Huge, huge numbers, and that's why there's such a focus on these profits this morning.
Absolutely right. Okay, Helen, and for now, thank you so much for that. Now, the life support system of 12-year-old Archie Battersbee is set to be turned off at midday today after the Court of Appeal rejected his family's request to postpone it further. The 12-year-old's parents have said they will make a final application to the Supreme Court, that is, of course, the country's highest court, to consider their application for permission to appeal. The Barts Health NHS Trust say that Archie is brainstem dead and that they believe it is not in his best interests to be kept on life support. Now, I spoke to Archie's mum on the programme yesterday.
Well, they handed the letter over on Saturday night with the choreographed execution of my son, which it's just, as I say, it's the anxiety in my chest all weekend. I don't even know how Paul's felt. We haven't actually spoke, but he hasn't even received the letter yet. I had to send him a screenshot. You know, there was no meeting, sat down and broken to gently. This is what's going to happen, followed with a set out of mortuary details, you know, things that any parent shouldn't have to go through.
Now, an estimated 1.25 million people in the United Kingdom have an eating disorder, with the number of young people affected rising sharply in the past 5 years. Now, one NHS trust has told Sky News that the rising demand for mental health and eating disorder services since the pandemic is putting more pressure on a health service already under strain. It comes ahead of a report released today on the impact of body image on mental and physical health. Now, the report makes 26 recommendations to the government. It says it should create a new licensing regime for non-surgical cosmetic procedures by July of 2023. Make sure consent for such procedures includes a full medical and mental health history and a 48-hour cooling-off period. Work with the industry and advertising watchdogs to discourage advertisers and social media influencers from doctoring their images, and ensure that any commercial images which have been altered, including using filters, should carry an information logo. It also says that the government should reconsider its decision to delay restricting multi-buy deals for food and drinks high in fat, salt or sugar and implement it immediately. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
I remember being sat by myself a lot, eating lunch alone, becoming more and more withdrawn.
Lizzie was only 12 years old when her mental health deteriorated.
The struggle with food, I always say, was born out of my trouble with anxiety, because I felt so out of control with everything in my life. And I can remember making almost like lists in my head of what I'd been eating that day. And at one point, it was just, that was the only thing that gave me that sense of security.
She developed anorexia as a way of coping with her anxiety and depression. By 15, her weight loss became so serious, Lizzie was admitted to a psychiatric unit for 10 weeks of life-saving treatment.
It was walking into hospital and seeing the other patients there and hearing the alarms and seeing the locks on the doors.
So for a 15-year-old in a psychiatric unit of a hospital, that must have been terrifying.
Yeah, it was. I was like, wow, I must be really sick to be here. I remember another patient there who had cuts all down their arm, and there'd be alarms going off where people had to be, withheld. I called my parents and I remember just crying to them, please come and get me. I cannot stay here. And that was just because the chaos around me.
More young people are being referred to mental health services than ever before.
In our service, since 2019, we've seen an increase in 140% the rate of referrals in.
Dr. Dorothy Newton, a consultant in eating disorders, tell me social media pressures around body image are helping to drive the surge.
I think that in many cases where a young person develops an eating disorder, it is often multifactorial, but we have absolutely seen many young people who are developing eating disorders who feel that they have been influenced by online content, and that has led to, for example, anxiety about their body shape.
Amelia Goldsmith is well aware of the pressure social media can bring on young people. That's why she uses her Instagram account to promote body positivity to her followers.
Now that I'm out of that mental state, I have the responsibility to show other people online that different bodies are, completely fine, and we can't compare our posed bodies to someone's completely natural body. And I think for me, I need to also do it for my own mental health, and I think posting my body in a posed state but also an unposed state can really make me realise that actually my body is so different in so many different lights, angles, everything like that.
Lizzie is now studying to be a doctor. One day, she hopes to use her own experiences with other young people who need help. Ashish Joshi, Sky News, West London.
Pleased to say I'm joined now by the Chair of the Health and Social Care Committee, Jeremy Hunt. Good morning to you, Jeremy Hunt. Thanks for being with us. So this report is quite arranging. It makes a couple of recommendations, but I do wonder what's being said to the social media companies to try and make sure that they bring in these warnings on images that they have been doctored.
Well, good morning, Kamali. I mean, the truth is, as you say in that report, the world has changed very dramatically. And we now think that around 60% of 17 to 19-year-olds may have a possible eating disorder. So this is a very dramatic increase over the last couple of decades. And social media appears to be one of the causes. We call for some research to be done so that we can properly understand that. But at a very minimum, when commercial companies Photoshop images to make people look more thin than they would be in real life, we think that should be labelled. We think people looking at those images should know this is not a real human being. And that's part of the way that we can help people use social media with more awareness of some of the tricks of the trade, if you like, and therefore stop this focus on ever thinner bodies, which is so damaging to so many young people, particularly young women.
Yeah, I mean, you think that, Mr. Hunt, as you say, and I'm sure many of our viewers feel the same. It does beg the question of why is it taking so long to try and make sure that those kind of rules are brought into place? Is it an issue with regulation? Should there be legislation brought in? What's the hold-up? Because we've known about this for a while.
Well, in fairness, I think that MPs have been on the case for quite a while, and my colleague, Dr. Luke Evans, has been campaigning very hard on this in Parliament. And I think the social media landscape is in need of an overhaul in areas like this, particularly when it affects young people. But I think the most important thing is the message we're giving in this report is just not the case that there's nothing we can do about this. There's the doctored social media images. There's also the fact that you've got a lot of backstreet cowboys where you can just turn up and get non-surgical cosmetic procedures done to change the look of your face, the shape of your nose. And we say that shouldn't be something you can just turn up and get done on the spot. There should be a cooling off period. And in particular, there should be an obligation on whoever is conducting that procedure to look into your full history, including your mental health history, and talk about that with you, because it might be that this isn't actually anything to do with your look. It's just to do with mental health issues. And the thing to do is to look at the root cause of those problems, not to change the look of your face.
I mean, is there enough support then for people who feel like this? We know that we're going through a time of difficulty in funding social care and, of course, the NHS. Are there enough professionals working in this field that can actually address people's concerns?
Well, we do say that access to NHS services has not been as easy as it should be. And, of course, that's the case across the board because of the post-COVID backlog and all sorts of other reasons. But I think our particular concern is actually that in some ways access is too easy for people who are feeling depressed or anxious about their body image. They can go and get these procedures done, on the spur of the moment without proper consideration. And then they find out that it hasn't actually solved the root problem, which was concern about their body image. And the other thing we say in the report, and this is, I think, a big change in terms of our overall way of thinking is that when we look at school children, our focus to date has been very much on whether they are overweight. And we do have a very big issue with obesity. We're one of the fattest nations in Europe. But we need also to be looking at whether people are underweight. And so what we recommend is annual health and well-being checks for children, in which people who are underweight are flagged just as much as people who are overweight.
OK, thank you for that, Jeremy Hunt. Let me move on, if I can, and ask you to put on your former Foreign Secretary hat for a moment. I just want you to react to the news we had coming in overnight of the drone strike that killed Ayman al-Zawahiri.
Well, no one's going to shed a tear for this very evil man. But what I would say is this also sends a very powerful signal to people who have tended to underestimate the strength of America and the West, and tended to say we're in decline and the future belongs to the Chinas and the Russias of this world. And I think what this shows is the technology at the disposal of the United States and its allies remains the most formidable of any in the world. And in the end, sometimes we take a while to get our act together, but in the end, the West will react when our values are under threat.
And do you think there are likely to be reprisals to this killing?
Well, you always run that risk. But in the end, I think what we've learned from what's happened in Ukraine is that sometimes weakness is a bigger provocation than strength. And our enemies, people who don't agree with our way of life, don't accept our values, need to understand that the West is going to be strong and resolute in the face of challenges to our way of life, which is open societies, respect for human rights, not marching into other countries, and not setting off terrorist bombs.
Now, this guy was killed in central Kabul. Does this just confirm for us that we can't trust what the Taliban say? They were not meant to be harbouring terrorists.
I'm afraid a lot of people will draw that inference, and I slightly draw that inference as well. I think that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a very big low point for many, many reasons. But this was the most important thing of all. We were supposed to be negotiating that Afghanistan would not go back to being a harbour for terrorists. I think this indicates that we can't be sure that's not the case.
OK. Jeremy Hunt, do appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Kamali.
OK, now, of course, we are getting down to the final few moments for the Conservative Party leadership race. We've got the Sky News debates taking place in a couple of days' time. There was, of course, a hustings last night where the third place runner, Penny Mordaunt, actually endorsed Liz Truss to be the next Prime Minister and, of course, the next leader of the Conservative Party. There is, of course, as I said, a debate taking place on Sky News at 8 o'clock on the 4th of August. It's the battle for number 10. It's going to be hosted by Kay Burley. And, of course, she will be putting the questions to those who are trying to replace Boris Johnson in number 10, of course, become the next leader of the Conservative Party and our next Prime Minister. Now, one of those people who are backing Liz Truss to take that job is the Minister for Brexit Opportunities, Mr Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I'm very pleased to say he's joined us here in the studio. Jacob Rees-Mogg, really lovely to see you. Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
To you. Thanks for being here. First of all, let's just speak about what we heard overnight, what Jeremy Hunt was just talking about, the killing by the Americans of Ayman al-Zawahiri. I mean, it's a huge scalp to get.
Yes, and it shows that people who have waged acts of war against the United States will not be able to retire peacefully to their beds, that the United States is rightly going after people who have created, led to, orchestrated mass murder in the United States and around the world.
Now, do you think that the West then was naive or foolish to believe that the Taliban wouldn't end up harbouring terrorists?
Well, I think that terrorists have been in Afghanistan throughout this period and that they didn't suddenly all disappear.
It was one of the promises made, wasn't it?
It's just a question of whether we've been able to track them down and that we know the areas in which they have been. And so I don't think it's a great surprise that a terrorist has been found in Afghanistan, nor would it have been a surprise if terrorists had been found in Afghanistan a year ago.
Were you slightly surprised that they were found in central Kabul? I mean, obviously bin Laden was in the border regions, that's where we think that many of them hide. In the capital?
Well, the Taliban has not been the most aggressive suppressor of terrorism, has it? So I don't think you should be surprised by this. But it's had a benefit, hasn't it? Because the Americans have been able to track him down and find him, which may have been more difficult if he'd been hiding in a more remote area.
I mean, how does this affect any potential engagement with that government that's running Afghanistan right now, do you think?
Well, it's difficult engaging with that government anyway, as we know, and that's been an issue in terms of providing financing for that government and the problems that people are having in Afghanistan, the very serious shortages that there are there. And the Taliban government is not a friend of the West, to put it at its mildest.
I think that's one way of putting it, of course. Let's move on to the domestic politics now. As I said, you are a backer of Liz Truss. You will have watched the hustings last night.
Well, no, because I was actually doing a different debate on behalf of Liz for the Bristol and South Gloucestershire Conservative Associations.
And what was the argument you were making for people to back her?
Well, the 3 points, really. One is that Liz is best placed economically, that she has the right policies that will help the economy grow and tackle inflation. Secondly, that she's a fully committed Brexiteer, that she may have supported Remain in 2016, but she's been one of the Cabinet Ministers most supporting me in my Brexit Opportunities role. And third, that she's shown leadership by support she's shown for Boris Johnson over Ukraine, but also her loyalty to Boris Johnson.
Now, you know that one of her own economic advisors is concerned that her economic policies could put interest rates up 7%.
Well, I think that misunderstands what Patrick Minford has said, actually. I think that the Independent Bank of England will set interest rates, and we have a serious inflationary problem, and interest rates have been going up. And if you look at what's happened in the United States, interest rates have gone up much faster in the United States. That is something done independently by the Bank of England since 1997, when Gordon Brown gave them that independence. What the government has to do is to make sure that fiscal policy both works against inflation and helps the economy to grow. And that's the difficult thing to do, because you need to keep expenditure under control, and plans have been announced as how to do that. But you also need to take the burden off people so that they keep more of their own money to help them through the cost of living crisis. And then you need the third thing, which Liz has been strongly advocating, which are the supply-side reforms that make the economy more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, those tax-cutting plans are one thing, and of course you will support her moves to do that. But this idea of kind of borrowing, of betting on this £30 billion headroom, as fantasy economics been described by some may describe it differently.
If you're going to talk about fairy tale economics, I think suggesting that there will be income tax cuts many, many years into the future is the finest fantasy, because
who said that?
Mr. Sunak, I believe. Because actually you will remember that both Peel and Gladstone said that income tax was itself a temporary measure, which they had a plan to remove in the mid-19th century. So making suggestions that tax will be cut in years to come is the greatest fairy tale. But when you take the borrowing figures, you've got to remember that the OBR's figure for 2021-22 was out by £106 billion. The OBR thought borrowing would be £106 billion more than it was. So the fantasy has been with the forecasters. And what we need is to get the theory of economic policy right and then apply it. And that involves taking burdens off people.
Are you completely happy with this idea of borrowing? It doesn't seem to me like, as a true Conservative as you are, you would be very happy with the state borrowing all of this money against an economic outlook, if I can finish, an economic outlook that we're not certain about with this ongoing war in Ukraine.
Governments almost always borrow. The years in which the government actually pays back debt are very few and far between. What you're talking about is the level of borrowing, and is it proportionate? Now, if you look at the borrowing of the state at the moment, the total borrowing, excluding the quantitative easing of £875 billion, which is owed by the government to the government. So if you net that off, we're under 60% of debt to GDP. I think it's a perfectly sustainable level.
Let's just pick up on some of the policy areas that Liz Truss was mentioning in the past few hours. This idea of cutting the civil service. I know that you're a fan of that. You left that famous note telling people to get back to work. But do you think the idea that cutting salaries, perhaps moving civil servants, people who are paid by the government, out of London, is the right way to make sure we level up the country?
There are a number of savings you get by moving civil servants out of London. You don't have the London waiting or the London allowance, and property costs are lower outside London. These are really important benefits, and it ties in with levelling up because you're moving the jobs out of London. But at the same time, we need a smaller civil service. We have 91,000 more people working for the civil service than we did in 2016. We need to get back to the 2016 level. That on its own will save about £3.5 billion, potentially more.
But it's not just the civil service, is it? Liz Truss is also talking about anyone's pay for the governments. That involves teachers, that involves police officers, involves nurses, doesn't it?
That's not the plan. The discussion at the moment is around civil servants.
OK. And staying on the civil service, then, there's this idea of cutting some 326 diversity officers. So is the job done? We don't need to worry about the civil service being diverse anymore?
No, I think ensuring that you have diversity within employment is the job of the people making the employment decisions, not somebody who is employed as a diversity officer. It is a role for...
Aren't they the experts in how you make sure that a workplace is diverse and how you make sure that...
No, I don't think it works like that. I think that you need to inculcate this in the people making the employment decisions and in the Civil Service Commission to ensure that you are employing the best people from a range of backgrounds. Actually, levelling up is crucial in this and moving jobs out of London, because you're then opening it up to people living all over the country rather than a very narrow London focus. So I think it's an important saving. And some of the nonsense that we've been getting, we had a training programme called Check Yo Privilege. Now, what on earth is that? Why is
checking your privilege, I think, is...
Why is the civil service wasting people's time with a course that doesn't help people do their jobs better? What do we want from the civil service? We want people to get their passports on time. We want people to get their driving licence on time. We want the probate service to work, all of which have had problems.
We also want it to be a workplace where people who are from different backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds, feel comfortable to work and won't feel like they are being...
And that is
stigmatised by their colleagues.
That isn't a job you give to somebody and you lock away in a private room to cogitate about it. That is something that you have in the fundamentals of it, in the people who are making the employment decisions. You're not going to get very far if you cut all the diversity officers who are working towards that, though, are you? Yes, because I don't believe they're doing anything useful. I don't believe they're adding to the diversity of the civil service. It's a job creation scheme created by the woke for the woke.
Mr. Rees-Mogg, I don't think that is entirely fair about all those diversity officers. I think that many of them are trying to achieve the best that they can to bring in... I think they would be
much better employed getting people the public services that they need.
Let's just bring up another little clip from last night's hosting. You said you didn't pay attention because you were doing something else, but this is what Liz Truss said about Nicola Sturgeon. I think we can play it.
I feel like I'm a child of the union, that I really believe we are a family and we're better together. And I think the best thing to do with Nicola Sturgeon is ignore her. I think she's... I think...
difficult when she's First Minister, though. She's got a democratically elected position, just as you would.
I'm sorry, she's an attention seeker, Seb. That's what she is. And what we need to do is show the people of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales what we are delivering for them.
Ignore her, she's an attention seeker. What's that going to do to the union when they are agitating to try and split it up?
Well, of course they're agitating. That's what you've got to remember. All that Nicola Sturgeon does is campaign to break the union. Education in Scotland has been doing badly. Health in Scotland has been doing badly. Public services in Scotland have been failing under the SNP. And what we need to do is to hold Miss Sturgeon to account for the failings of the Scottish Government to deliver services for the people of Scotland. And when she's waffling on endlessly about having a referendum and going to the Supreme Court and all of this, we need to be saying, hold on, you're doing this because you are failing to deliver for the people of Scotland, and the United Kingdom government will have to deliver for the people of Scotland as well.
I know that her point would be that that is the reason for the SNP, that they want to have an independent Scotland, and you're not going to be able to achieve anything further in terms of discussion by ignoring them, are you?
Well, we have to deal with the arguments for the United Kingdom. How did Scotland get through the pandemic? It got through the pandemic because of the support that there was from the United Kingdom as a whole. The United Kingdom taxpayer helped England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as a union. It was fundamental. The vaccine rollout was a United Kingdom success. It was the United Kingdom that had the resources and the firepower to help this country get out of COVID before other countries, to the huge benefit of our economy, whilst Nicola Sturgeon was doing daily press conferences wanting them in a permanent lockdown. So I think she's very often wrong. She's always moaning. And that we need to focus on how the union benefits people.
You're very aware of how comments like that and what Liz Truss said last night only calcify the feeling in Scotland that they want to separate from...
No, they don't. What they do is the SNP gets very cross. Well, of course the SNP gets cross. It's its permanent default state. is a state of mild fury, a lot of it confected. What we need to do is make the arguments about why the United Kingdom is successful for the people of Scotland and how the United Kingdom as a whole has helped the people of Scotland when the Scottish government has consistently failed in key public services.
OK, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Minister for Brexit Opportunities. Lovely to talk
My
to you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, this one. Thank you. All right, now to the war in Ukraine, and a ship transporting grain through the Black Sea for the first time since Russia invaded Ukraine 5 months ago is on its way to Lebanon. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi is in Odessa, where the ship left yesterday. Good morning to you, Alex. So what do we know about this ship? Whereabouts is it? Is it on its way to Lebanon now?
Well, it's heading into Turkish waters at the moment. It will head through the Bosphorus and it will dock in Istanbul, where we understand it will be checked by officials from the United Nations, from Turkey, Russia, and also from Ukraine. That is part of the agreement under the Black Sea Initiative, which was brokered in Istanbul a couple of weeks ago. So that's the first ship, a glimmer of hope, really, that more will set sail. We understand from the Ukrainians that 16 are waiting at the port here and another two ports in the Odessa region. Hopefully, they'll also be able to leave as well if this voyage goes smoothly for the ship that set sail yesterday. And it is extremely important that this deal does work. There is a global food crisis which is worsening in many parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East and also in the Horn of Africa. Now, after the inspection of this ship, it will make its way to Lebanon. It's loaded with 26,000 metric tons of corn, much needed, of course, in that country. But Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. It supplies large amounts of food crops to the world, and it's vital, according to the World Food Programme, that that stuff gets out to the countries that need it most.
All right, Alex, in Odessa, I do appreciate that. Thank you. Now, China's envoy to the United Nations has warned that Nancy Pelosi's visits to Taiwan will undermine China's relations with the United States. The leading Democrat and Speaker of the House of Representatives has landed in Malaysia and is expected to travel to the disputed island later today. Well, let's get more on this from Divya Gopalan. She's the international editor at Taiwan Plus. Divya, thanks very much for being with us. So we are still expecting Ms Pelosi to arrive in Taipei in the next few hours, are we?
Well, Kamali, no one's confirming it. The U.S. is not confirming it. Definitely officials here in Taiwan are not confirming it. They've remained very tight-lipped about it. And in fact, the only reference we've had to it from the upper-level officials here was from the premier saying that they are ready either way. But according to the state news agency here in Taiwan, Taiwan's military has raised its combat readiness, which means it's raised its level of which it can defend itself. China has very clearly said that they will take resolute action against Nancy Pelosi visiting, and that the People's Liberation Army will not be idly standing by. While they haven't exactly said what they will do, the U.S. is also warning that China may increase its aggression. They have clearly said, again, that it will not perhaps be in the form of an attack or invasion, but definitely intimidation tactics, maybe more flybys in Taiwan's air defense zone, or even naval exercises closer to the Taiwan waters. People here in Taiwan have remained muted somewhat, but they are concerned, though, not necessarily because of the specter of China's aggressive military action. They've lived under the shadow for decades, but it's because of what else China can do. China is Taiwan's biggest trading partner, and China has already said that 100 firms from Taiwan, their products will be banned. So it could affect people's pockets here.
OK, Divya Gopalan in Taipei, do appreciate that. Thank you. Now, over half of independent pubs in the UK have had to reduce trading hours because of a lack of staff, with 15% saying their business is no longer viable. The City Pub Group, who run over 50 pubs in several cities around the country, are calling for a major review of the sector's business rates and an immediate plan to reduce staff shortages. Well, joining me now is co-founder of the City Pub Group, that's Clive Watson. Clive Watson, good morning to you and thanks for being with us. So just tell us, why are you finding it so difficult to recruit staff right now?
Because there's just a lack of availability. It's not a question of pay. We're putting out adverts for jobs. We're offering very good levels of pay, good levels of bonuses, good retention. But there are very few applicants, and a lot of people have left the industry, and a lot of people have left the country.
And what's that doing to the underlying business? I mean, how damaging is it to the industry that you can't actually get people to work in the venues?
Well, the pub industry, hospitality industry is a labour-intensive business, a bit like the NHS. You need able bodies to perform the tasks, to provide, in our case, the service to our customers. If you don't have the bodies there, then it makes that much more difficult. You have to cut back on for instance, the food offer that you're providing. Sometimes you have to cut back on the hours. So, yeah, it's slowly throttling the British pub.
So what do you want to see happen here, Clive? What do you want? Is there a role for government in this?
Well, I think it's not just the hospitality. It's, as I mentioned, it's the NHS, it's the farming industry, it's construction, social care workers, lots of what I call labour-intensive businesses. We need to have a flexible visa programme where people can come for specific times, say 2 years, they come specifically to work in this country, and to provide that flexible labour force that can slot into the industries where there are, in some cases, chronic shortages, and provide that extra labour so that the hospitality industry, NHS, other industries I mentioned, have the right amount of labour to provide the level of service that, in our case, customers expect.
Sort of a similar sort of thing as we see in the farming industry, where you can get temporary visas to bring workers in seasonally.
I saw an article in the paper the other day that one of the leadership candidates is talking about increasing the number of seasonal workers and increasing the period they can be here, I think from 3 months to 6 months. And that is a start. That's identifying the problem and coming up with a pragmatic solution. But that's just a drop in the ocean. We're talking about lots and lots of sectors that are, as I say, labour-intensive, that need more access to a flexible, energetic, more employees.
OK, Clive Watson, do appreciate your time this morning, and best of luck finding some people to work in the venues. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, let's take a little look at some of the images that we saw in this morning's papers that we like the looks of. This is one from The Telegraph. That little Shetland pony. If you're a fan of that show Parks and Recs, it reminds me of little Sebastian. Remember that? Now, this little guy, who after a lot of hard work was instilled as the unofficial mayor of Cockington in Devon. He was voted in by villagers after gaining popularity for his therapy work during the pandemic. Who wouldn't be happier after meeting that little guy? Now, let's look inside The Times. That brings us a picture of a contestant diving off the old bridge in Bosnia. That is excellent form. It's part of the 456th annual diving competition from this bridge. They've been doing that a long time. More than 30 people have braved the 23-metre dive into the river from the bridge. This guy got 10 points. And finally, sealed with a kiss, the Daily Express shows us a picture that was entered in the Comedy Wildlife Awards. Not sure how happy that seal is about receiving that kiss, and I also like the winking owl. Very cheeky.